Well, I started out as a pro player. I'll use the waggly fingers for that one there in Call of Duty 4 back in Australia. So I probably played about 4K hours of the game and was scrimming fairly regularly. And I loved just the idea. I didn't really think about eSports or what the wider scheme of it all was. But eventually university got in the way and made it pretty hard for me to to regularly be able to put in the practice time. I was studying an engineering degree, so a little bit time intensive. So I just moved into casting, and it was very much a random thing. Someone asked me if I was interested. It was just radio back then. Australia's infrastructure, not great. So we probably had the same internet in 2010 as Sweden had in 1998. But pretty much just threw the Shoutcast app on Winamp and did a little bit of that for a while and found that I enjoyed it quite a lot, just doing Call of Duty 4 as well, and managed to build a bit of a following, mostly because I was one of the first there, and also because I never shut up, which is great for radiocast because you have a lot of dead air you need to fill. You need to paint a very vivid picture of what's going on in the game itself. So from there on, I just sort of started, I went from Call of Duty, then into Counter-Strike Source, casting, into League of Legends, pretty much everything I could get my hands on at the time, just because I enjoyed it. I didn't really still wasn't thinking about where that would take me until I did get my degree, sort of had that all finished in, it's a long time now, at 2012 it was. And I thought, I could go and get a desk job as an engineer, or I could sort of hope to try and actually make something out of this career. And at the time, there were a couple opportunities. I was doing some trade shows around Australia, and I did some of those, and actually deferred my degree, or finished my degree, but didn't go into an engineering job, and worked in a pharmacy for 2 years, which was really hard. It was a very busy, crowded community pharmacy with lots of grumpy people every day. But I did it so I could cast. I had the free time. All my holidays were used in casting. And I was doing like trade shows at PAX and stuff in Australia, and then eventually a bloke from ESL noticed me and brought me over to host some water tank stuff here in Europe. It was my first time out of Australia and stuff like that. Long story short, did a few more of those, and they gave me the full-time job. So it's very different to being at home, I guess, if you talk about schedule-wise. I don't know if I ever thought I'd be here. I guess the idea only materialized for me when I started doing trade shows and realizing that I was actually doing an okay job. But it's very different. It's one thing to get home from work and sit at your computer, take your work clothes off, put normal clothes on, and put the webcam on and go stream a random League of Legends game, to coming into work, putting on work clothes to cast, The lifestyle is pretty chaotic because of scheduling, and it's often late nights, but I'm still living the dream. Like, I haven't really missed home that much because I'm so preoccupied with enjoying my job. Well, the infrastructure in Australia, technologically speaking, is really quite archaic still. I think we now rank 66th in the world in terms of internet speeds, and I think we're top 10 of the most developed countries. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just not a priority for our government at the moment to really push that kind of technology. So the only times we really got decent games of COD 4 was at LAN, right? Because if you were on one side of Australia and the server was on the other, you'd have 100 milliseconds ping in the same country, which is pretty nonsense. It was always LANs. We spent a lot of money traveling to LANs because it was in the next state, which is like a $200 flight or a 12-hour car trip, whatever you prefer. So infrastructure definitely holds it back a lot. Streaming is the same as well. Most Australian households at maximum have maybe 0.6 megabits per second upload, right? So you can't even really stream at that. You need at least 2 megabits per second upload is that's like a really nice internet connection. It's probably very expensive, so not many people can really do it, which is why we were radio casting still in 2010. Culture is also one thing that holds Australia back. We're just not a super connected country, and I think that has a lot to do with proximity. We're a long way away from the rest of the world. I wouldn't call your average Australian a global citizen. I think it's pretty easy to be quite microcosmic it's a bit of a storm in the teacup our country is, and we keep to ourselves a bit. And internet as well. We're not well connected to the rest of the world. So people aren't being exposed to esports on a large scale yet. We have organic fan bases in Australia that grow because people were already in gaming and they managed to see it, right? But bringing in, I guess, more organic viewership from the prospect of esports is hard to do because it doesn't have a lot of exposure, it hasn't gained traction in Australia, and the infrastructure to put on regular big esports events, sponsors, all that kind of stuff just doesn't exist. So honestly, if I look at an event like this, we're like 10 years behind. Yeah, I mean, so with Legacy, I guess they came to me when they needed a manager because I knew them from when I managed them under Mindfreak, which that wasn't a decision for them to bring me on. I was sort of part of being in Mindfreak, but that was the time I got to know the guys a fair bit, and they came back to me after they switched teams a couple of times and asked me to come on board. So I pretty much managed a lot of the day-to-day stuff, flights, or making sure we had a TeamSpeak server. It was actually, my responsibilities in the beginning were very light. Right? It's like deal with the emails, deal with the interviews, deal with Riot, for example, and then it started to blow up for them now. I mean, I handed off the role of sort of management a while back now, since I left Germany. The guy I've got doing it now has got them in a gaming house, he's got the massive sponsorships, like it's incredible to see how much it's grown. So I wouldn't call myself much of a manager with what I was able to do because I was so busy as well at the same time with my casting and work on the side. It's a very rewarding experience, but it is very expensive for me anyway because we didn't have venture capital, we didn't have sponsor backing at the start. So there are quite a few flights that I would dig in my pockets for. I'd fly often interstate to meet with potential sponsors. ASUS was our first sponsor that we managed to line up, which as good as they were to work with, took me a long time to line up and many trips for, like 3-hour plane trips sort of across just to meet them for lunch and then head back home in the end of the day. So it's 6 hours of flying a day. So tricky. They're getting there, though, really quickly. And I think League of Legends, less so CS, although I wish it was the other way around, I think. League of Legends brings sponsors because Riot has a presence in Australia now. They have an office in Oceania. So it's starting to really pick up traction, but slowly. And teams are now getting gaming houses, but only the top teams. So, yeah, I mean, to summarise it, it was rewarding for me, but expensive. But to see the players be able to grow because I was able to invest time in them is an incredibly good experience. Although not something I really think I'd ever do again because I still have a lot of my own personal aspirations in esports in general.
Right, and you were talking about
Well, I mean, I think not from preference, but from necessity, I've been a bit of a jack of all trades, caster and host. It kind of goes hand in hand with working for ESL as well, because if you have a full-time job at this company, right? And that full-time job is not for you to just do one CS show a week and then piss off, right? You need to be around and involved in a lot. And I valued that opportunities to do those different games because it just improves me in general, right? But I'm never going to be an expert in any of those games while I'm still doing 4 other games, right? I think at one point I was doing, 5 games at once, casting them, which is pretty unheard of currently now. We have a lot of people who specialize. So honestly, in the future, I do want to specialize a bit more, hopefully. Casting for me is my main goal right now, even though I'm here at a major hosting, which is fantastic. I'm happy to be here. I wouldn't say it's exactly what I want to do. But luckily, my full-time job is esports, right? So you can keep up with a lot of trends. I generally just keep a very broad glance over everything that's happening in all the different esports via Twitter or whatever news sites. And then when I'm preparing for an event, I really dig deep and I will go back and I will go over interviews and I will talk to people that I know. Making connections with players in those scenes has been the most valuable thing for me as well, because they make themselves available to me to talk to, how you're feeling, whether I just interviewed them at the last event and they appreciated that, and then I can get some more info out of them. So I think for someone who doesn't do esports as a full-time job, it's really hard. But I think that's kind of what my job is to be spread over all different esports. But if I was specialized, I'd probably spend all my time on one game, and I think that I'd be able to at least display a bit more expertise if I did. I think fortunately I managed to foster some relationships with a lot of people at ESL before I actually moved here full time, because I was doing quite a few events. So specifically Pansy as well, I worked with her on World of Tanks a lot, and Joe as well, who was often managing me coming over in the first place. So able to have connections with those guys when I first came here was quite good, because they were able to help me a little bit settling in and dealing with some of the pitfalls for the unwary that Germany sort of has. But generally speaking, it wasn't that rough a transition. ESL were good. They helped me find a place quite easily. The language is a little bit tricky, although I've picked up quite a lot now after a year. People still are very helpful, and they can speak English most of the time anyway. So I think it was just the routine of work.